How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather 25. Today is August 5th, 2021, and today we're going to focus on two tropical disturbances which could potentially become Tropical Storm Fred and Grace in the main development region. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather icons, and make sure to like if you like this video, and make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather icons. So let's begin by taking a look at the entire Atlantic view of the water vapor imagery, and you see that we do have a lot of convection occurring in the main development region. We have a little bit of convection occurring right in the central portion of the main development region, and we have more convection occurring closer along the West African coast, pretty much hugging the coast at this point. Now, there's a disturbance located right around this area where there is some isolated thunderstorm activity which could potentially become a tropical storm or tropical depression, and we have more convection currently low, where the central low pressure currently located right around along the coast of West Africa that also has the potential of developing into a tropical cyclone. Now, take a look at this first disturbance, how it's looking when it comes to its composition. You see that it's sort of the same as yesterday. There isn't much thunderstorm activity. We are seeing a little bit more thunderstorm activity than yesterday, but again, we aren't seeing that huge blow of thunderstorms which would make it into potentially a tropical cyclone. So the good news is that we aren't seeing that blow of thunderstorms, but however, that maybe could change as it heads further northward and conditions become more favorable, because right now the conditions aren't necessarily in this disturbance's favor right now. We have a lot of dry air located on the northward side of this storm, and we still do have a little bit of wind shear induced by an upper level low that's south of the equator at this point. And right now, these cluster of thunderstorms are moving a little bit too fast in the upper levels of the atmosphere to really have the upper level to really have all of the layers coincide with each other when it comes to wind and where that energy is going, because in the upper levels the winds are too strong, so a lot of the air molecules are diverting far away from the center of circulation, and that's making it difficult to see a blow of thunderstorm activity when there isn't a ton of convection occurring right now. However, that could change as it heads further northward, where the dry air might mitigate a little bit, and where the wind shear will definitely lessen as you head closer to the Caribbean. Now, taking a look at this other disturbance just off the west coast of Africa at this point, you see that we do see a lot more thunderstorm activity, as it seems like this does have more potential of developing into a tropical cyclone if you look at it based off of the convection, and that is currently the case right now, as this has a higher chance of developing, and in fact it's actually more likely than not that this will develop into a tropical cyclone. We're seeing a pretty good blow up of thunderstorm activity, especially on the southern side of the center of circulation. We need to begin seeing convection on the northern side. However, that might be a little bit more difficult, because for one thing is that there's a lot of Saharan dust on the northward side, and also it's the fact that on the northern side of this storm, the water temperatures are a lot cooler, so less convection is bound to happen, and it's more likely we'll see sinking air from the upper levels of the atmosphere, where the air will sink right around this region where the sea surface temperatures are cooler, where the storm will outflow a lot of its stable air into where the dry air is currently located. Now, taking a look at the current chance that this develops over the next 5 days, you see that we do have a medium chance of development for disturbance 1, which is now up to a 60% chance within the next 5 days, which means that more likely than not, we will see at least some sort of tropical depression or tropical storm out of this low pressure system along the west coast of Africa. And the good news is that for disturbance 2, the chance still remains light, only a low 20% chance over the next 5 days, while there's a 0% chance over the next 48 hours. Now, to take a look at if these two storms will develop, we first need to take a look at the GFS model. So the GFS model is very interesting because if we take a look at it, it pretty much develops two 2 to 3 center circulations where a lot of vorticity is occurring. And now this might be a problem for this storm, because if there's 3 areas where there's a lot of cyclonic vorticity, that's going to make it really difficult for it's going to make it very difficult for a tropical cyclone to develop, because let's say because pretty much all 3 of these cyclonic vorticity signatures are going to be fighting for energy, and there's only so much energy and air molecules all 3 of these tropical cyclones to develop, yes, especially within a small area. So it's unlikely that one of the cyclonic vorticity areas will get just enough energy to develop into potentially a tropical cyclone or storm, because it's going to be competing with 2 other areas of convection. We'll need to see which one wins out, because there is that possibility that maybe this convection just combines into one well-defined low pressure system and develops this into a tropical storm. But we need to wait and see how this reacts over the next several days. However, despite how broad the cyclonic vorticity map this area is, the GFS is still pretty lenient on developing at least some sort of tropical storm out of this, because you see that even headed further in the future, we have 3 areas where there's pretty much a well-defined low pressure system or center circulation, but you see that one kind of wins out where this low pressure system that was originally in the middle now sort of absorbs the one that's to the northwest of the storm, and you see that it kind of combines that cyclonic vorticity into one low pressure system, which is something that's needed for this to develop, because it can't really compete against 2 other potential tropical cyclones or low pressure systems, because that would divert the energy away from from the main low pressure system that could develop, and that would mean that there will be less convection and the max speed would be lower. Now, taking a look at the European model to see what it is forecasting, it also expects convection to develop just off the west coast of Africa. And then in terms of the track, both the computer models seem like they want to steer this northward, which would definitely be good news, because it would miss out on the Caribbean and more likely the US, because when the storm goes up this north so early, it's pretty likely that it kind of just steers out to sea. The only real exception I remember where a storm this far up north and to the east made it to the United States was hurricane. It hit North Carolina. I forgot the name. I don't know why, but it hit North Carolina and South Carolina in 2018, September of 2018, and it pretty much made the whole trek on westward. But it's extremely rare for that to happen, because there's only so much time the storm could hang out this far north before trough pretty much steers it out to sea. But the good news is that this is moving northward, so I think if it does this track, it's more likely to eventually head out to sea than impact any land. And you see that eventually this convection moves northward as a result of a ridge that sort of builds just south of the Bermuda High Wall. I shouldn't say a ridge, but a bigger area of ridging definitely develops in this area, and we begin to see that storm turn up northward as a result. So both the computer models are leaning towards developing, I think, a tropical cyclone out of disturbance one, and then maybe eventually turning it up north as a result of a ridge building closer to the west coast of Africa. But again, I'm going 7 days out. There's still a lot of uncertainty regarding that forecast, but you see that both the computer models seem to be leaning towards this storm moving northward eventually. Exactly where will be the question, but especially since that will be a key determinant in if this develops or not. Now, taking a look at what the GFS model is expecting when it comes to wind shear in the upper levels of the atmosphere. It's going to be another key factor to determine if this develops, because if we take a look at the wind shear right now, there is quite a bit of wind shear just off the west coast of Africa at this time. And if we were continuing to move forward, it's going to stick around for a while. And while this isn't a ton of wind shear, it's still enough to definitely potentially hinder this storm and inhibit its development. But you see that the wind shear eventually does wind down, and as the storm moves further westward into a more favorable area where the wind shear is lighter, that will definitely make conditions more favorable for tropical cyclone development. So, based off of what the GFS and European model is saying, it should be more likely than not that this storm will enter a favorable area. The question is how far north exactly it will go, because another big factor that could determine the chance of development of this storm is the amount of dry air, because you see there's going to be quite a bit of dry air to the north of it, and however the GFS model is expecting this storm to sort of fend off the dry air because it's going to have a relatively small circulation, but eventually the GFS model does expect the dry air to win out, which is definitely the best case scenario, but this is 150 hours out, so it should be taken with a grain of salt when we're talking about forecasts beyond the 5-day mark, because it does become more uncertain. But the good news is that dry air is expected to entrain the northern Atlantic, so that should make it more difficult for development or beyond the 5-day mark, or at least maintaining its strength beyond the 5-day mark. Now, another big factor will be how far north or how far south this storm will go, because if we take a look at sea surface temperatures, you see that further northward the sea surface temperatures are below the 80-degree threshold, and that will make it more difficult for tropical cyclone development, because convection is pretty much enhanced by very warm water, and when there isn't warm water, the convection will be slower and it won't really accelerate to a point where it could develop a tropical cyclone and in fact inhibit its development entirely. So right now it seems like the GFS model is leaning towards bringing this further northward, and so is earlier than the European model. So we need to wait and see which one is right, but if the GFS model was correct, it might be more difficult for this storm to develop because sea surface temperatures will be cooler than average. And however, I think if the European model is more correct, then we could see further development because it will be over warmer water that's warm enough for tropical cyclone development. So check will be another factor to keep in mind, and also the dry air, because one of the things that might inhibit this storm beyond the 5-day mark is the Saharan dust layer. Right now it seems like it's more likely than not the Saharan dust or the dry air in the northern Atlantic will eventually kill off these two disturbances I'm talking about. But again, for disturbance 1 that I'm talking about, that's closer to the West African coast, there it still becomes uncertain beyond the 5-day mark if that Saharan dust will be there. If it isn't there, then we could maybe see it develop further, but it seems like a more likely scenario is that the Saharan dust will eventually kill off two of these storms if they do develop into tropical storms, which is certainly the good news. Now, taking a look at the sea surface temperature anomaly for right now as of July 31st, this is concerning because we see most of the Atlantic pretty much having well above average sea surface temperatures, and that should promote more lift in the atmosphere and could make it a very active year when it comes to hurricane season. So this is very concerning, and I want you guys to keep in mind that we could be in for much more active August and hurricane season in general than usual. So make sure to keep that in mind. Now, taking a look at the MJO pattern, which pretty much means that if you're in the negative phase, you're more likely to see tropical cyclone development because there would be more lift in the atmosphere. However, if you're in the positive phase, you're less likely to see tropical cyclone development. And you see over the next 2 weeks, the Atlantic is expected to be under a negative MJO pattern, which means that tropical cyclone conditions could be more favorable over the next several weeks, and that could definitely promote more hurricanes and tropical storms over the next few weeks. And this is concerning because we are in the month of August, a very active month, and when we're seeing a negative MJO pattern in the middle of a very active month, that does definitely raise a concern when it comes to how many tropical cyclones will form. Now, for my forecast, I do think that Tropical Storm Fred, or at least tropical depression will be likely out of this. It is both the GFS and European wall are leaning to developing at least some cyclonic vorticity, and they're steering it just a little bit further northward. We have to wait and see how much dry air this entrains and how far north early it goes, because that'll be a huge determinant if this develops. But it seems more likely than not Tropical Storm Fred will develop, while Tropical Storm Grace, right now it's going to deal with a lot of dry air, and it's going to be just very difficult for it to fend off a lot of that dry air, which is certainly good news because we don't want to see Tropical Storm Grace out of this. So that's definitely great news. And beyond the 5-day mark for Tropical Storm Grace, there shouldn't be much of a future. Taking a look again at the GFS model to see what it's forecasting when it comes to Tropical Storm Grace. Tropical Storm Grace would be right around this area. If we were to continue to move forward, you see that there's just too much dry air in the Caribbean and too much stable air for Tropical Storm Grace to form, which is likely that we won't see Tropical Storm Grace form, which is definitely good news, but we can't at all rule out that possibility because, again, the hurricane season could be unpredictable. But yeah, guys, I guess that's it for this video. Well, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content. Make sure to like this video. Make sure to turn on post notifications if you want to see even more weather content. And I hope you guys have a good day.